Imagine the scene. The year is 1994. In the arid plains of southeastern Anatolia, a land baked by the sun and steeped in the dust of millennia. Here, on a rounded hilltop, a place the locals call Göbekli Tepe, or Potbelly Hill, a secret lay buried, not for centuries, but for 12,000 years. This was not a city, not a tomb, not a fortress, but something far more profound. An idea given form in stone before the invention of pottery, before the advent of writing, before the first metal was ever forged. What lay sleeping beneath the earth was a temple, a cathedral of the Stone Age, built by people we had long dismissed as simple hunter-gatherers. How could they, a people without kings, without cities, without agriculture, erect a monument that would rewrite the very first chapter of human civilization? Before the revelation of Göbekli Tepe, the story of civilization was a simple, linear progression, a neat and tidy narrative that had been accepted for generations. Humanity, it was believed, stumbled out of the Ice Age as small, nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers. Their existence, a constant, desperate struggle for survival against the elements. They were slaves to the seasons, following the herds and the ripening of wild plants. Their lives too precarious for the luxury of complex society. Then, around 10,000 years ago, came the Great Revolution, the dawn of agriculture. This, the historians and archaeologists told us, was the catalyst for everything. With the cultivation of crops and the domestication of animals came surplus food, and with surplus food came settled life. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities. With permanent settlement came the division of labor, the rise of priests and rulers, the construction of monumental architecture, and the birth of complex religion. It was a clear sequence of events: agriculture first, then civilization. This was the foundational myth of the modern world, the bedrock upon which our understanding of the past was built. It was a story that made sense, a story of practical needs driving social change. The temple, the grand expression of communal belief, was seen as the capstone of this process, the final flourish of a society that had already solved the fundamental problems of existence. The gods, it was assumed, could only be worshipped on a full stomach. This orderly, logical progression was the undisputed truth, taught in every textbook and displayed in every museum. It was a truth that was about to be shattered, pulverized into dust by the silent, imposing stones of a forgotten hill in Turkey. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe would force us to confront a radical new idea, a possibility so profound it bordered on heresy. What if it was the other way around? What if the desire to build a temple, the urge to worship, was not the consequence of civilization, but its very cause? What if the temple came first? The man who would stumble upon this earth-shattering secret was a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt. In the autumn of 1994, Schmidt was conducting a survey of prehistoric sites in the region, reviewing old reports and looking for clues that others might have missed. He came across a brief mention from a 1963 survey by American archaeologists who had noted some limestone slabs on Göbekli Tepe, but had dismissed them as little more than abandoned medieval grave markers. But something in the description, a mention of flint chips littering the surface, piqued Schmidt's interest. This was not the debris of medieval stonemasons. It was the signature of the Stone Age. He decided to visit the site himself, and what he found would change his life and our understanding of history forever. As he walked the rounded crest of the hill, he saw not just a few scattered slabs, but the tops of immense T-shaped pillars just barely breaking the surface of the soil. He knew, with an instinct honed by years of experience, that these were not natural formations. He knew he was standing on something monumental, something ancient, something deliberately buried. He realized that the entire hill, the potbelly itself, was artificial, a man-made mound covering a vast, complex structure. The scale of it was almost unimaginable. This was no simple shrine. This was a colossal undertaking. The initial excavations began the following year, and the reality of what lay beneath was more spectacular than even Schmidt could have dreamed. As his team carefully brushed away the millennia of accumulated earth, they revealed not just pillars, but circles of them, massive megaliths arranged in precise ritualistic enclosures. There were dozens of these T-shaped monoliths, some towering over 16 feet high and weighing up to 20 tons. They were carved from the limestone bedrock of a nearby quarry, using nothing more than flint tools. The labor required to hew, transport, and erect these stones was staggering, a feat that would challenge even modern engineers, let alone a society of hunter-gatherers. This was not the work of a small band. This required the coordinated effort of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, a level of social organization that was thought to be impossible for the era. The implications were immediate and profound. This was a direct, undeniable contradiction to the established narrative. Here was monumental, complex architecture, predating the invention of agriculture by thousands of years. The temple had, impossibly, come first. What followed was a journey into a lost world, a world of astonishing artistry and profound symbolism. The T-shaped pillars were not crude, unfinished stones. They were masterpieces of Neolithic art. As the dirt was cleared away, intricate carvings were revealed, a stunning menagerie of the prehistoric world. There were snarling foxes, leaping boars, menacing spiders, and long-legged cranes. Snakes writhed in dense, terrifying clusters. Vultures, symbols of death and transformation in many ancient cultures, were a common and powerful motif. These were not random doodles, they were powerful, stylized representations, carved in high relief with a skill and confidence that was breathtaking. The animals were overwhelmingly male, depicted with an aggressive, almost threatening energy. But the pillars themselves held an even deeper secret. Schmidt and his team soon realized that the T-shape was not an abstract design, it was a stylized representation of the human form. The top of the T was the head, seen in profile, while the shaft of the pillar was the body. On the sides of some pillars, faint carvings of arms and hands could be seen, the fingers pointing towards a loincloth carved at the front. These were not just stones, they were anthropomorphic beings. Silent, powerful figures, standing in a circle, as if in a gathering or a ritual. They were perhaps stylized ancestors, or supernatural guardians, or the very gods themselves. The first pantheon ever rendered in stone. The enclosures they formed were not dwellings. There was no sign of habitation, no hearths for cooking, no middens for trash. This was a place of ceremony, a place of pilgrimage. Hunter-gatherers from across the region, from a radius of 100 miles or more, must have converged on this sacred hill. Here, they would have feasted, they would have worshipped, and they would have worked. The sheer amount of animal bones found at the site, all from wild species, attests to massive feasts, perhaps ritual gatherings that coincided with the construction of new enclosures. This was a sacred center, a place where disparate bands of people could come together, reaffirm their social bonds, and participate in a shared cosmology, a shared understanding of the universe. It was the birth of organized religion, happening thousands of years before anyone had thought possible. The discovery sent shockwaves through the world of archaeology. The tidy, linear model of the Neolithic Revolution, the agriculture first paradigm, was completely upended. It was not a gentle revision. It was a demolition. The very foundations of our understanding of prehistory were shaken. Göbekli Tepe presented a stark, undeniable fact. Hunter-gatherers were not the simple, brutish survivalists we had imagined. They possessed a rich, complex inner world, a sophisticated cosmology, and the social and technical ability to translate that cosmology into monumental stone architecture. The old theory held that complex society was a result of a surplus of food created by farming. Göbekli Tepe suggested the opposite. The immense effort required to build these structures, the need to quarry, transport, and erect 20-ton pillars, would have required a level of social organization and logistical planning that was unprecedented. It would have required a large, coordinated workforce, and that workforce would have needed to be fed. Scholars now believe that the intense pressure of feeding the hundreds of workers who gathered at this sacred site may have been the very impetus for the invention of agriculture. The wild grasses that grew on the slopes of the nearby Karaka Da Mountains, the very ancestors of our modern domesticated wheat, may have been cultivated for the first time not to feed settled villagers, but to provide sustenance for the builders of the temple. The desire to connect with the cosmos, to give form to their spiritual world, may have been the spark that ignited the agricultural revolution. Religion, it now seemed, was the engine of civilization, not its passenger. This radical reinterpretation was not without controversy. Debates raged in academic journals and at conferences. Some tried to downplay the significance of the site, to fit it back into the old models. But the evidence was overwhelming. The sheer age of Göbekli Tepe, confirmed by carbon dating, was indisputable. It was 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, 7,000 years older than the pyramids of Giza. It represented a chapter of human history that we never even knew existed. The legacy of Göbekli Tepe is not just about rewriting the first chapter of civilization. It is about fundamentally changing our perception of our own distant ancestors. It forces us to ask profound questions about the nature of humanity itself. What drives us to create? What is the origin of our need for meaning, for ritual, for a connection to something larger than ourselves? For 12,000 years, this temple lay deliberately and carefully buried, its secrets preserved beneath a man-made hill. Around 8000 BCE, the people who had built and worshipped at this site for millennia did something extraordinary. They backfilled the enclosures, burying their sacred temple under tons of earth, flint, and animal bones. Why they did this remains one of the greatest mysteries of all. Was it a ritual burial of a sacred site that had come to the end of its life? Was it a way of protecting it from outsiders? Or had their beliefs changed, their gods been abandoned? We may never know. But in burying their temple, they created a time capsule, preserving it from the ravages of time, leaving it for a distant future to uncover. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe is a humbling reminder that the past is a far stranger and more complex place than we can imagine. It shows us that the human imagination, the desire to build, to create, and to worship, is one of the most powerful forces in our history. It was a force strong enough to gather nomadic hunters into a community, to inspire them to carve mountains into gods, and in doing so, to inadvertently lay the foundations for the modern world. The silent, T-shaped stones of Potbelly Hill stand as a testament to a forgotten epoch, a powerful and unsettling echo from the dawn of humanity. A 12,000-year-old temple that shatters history and reveals that the journey to civilization was not a straight line, but a winding, mysterious path, driven not just by the needs of the body, but by the profound, timeless hunger of the human spirit.